Welcome back everybody, and it's amazing what sort of rabbit holes you can fall down if you watch YouTube too much, and one of those getting into this hobby was finding out about oil paints and how wonderful a finish they can create that is very realistic. And one of the channels that I've kind of got stuck on is Mended Brush Studio. Does a fantastic job of discussing colors and just showing the application of how you can put the paint on a model. So I decided to lash out and I purchased a set of Pebeo entry-level paints. No idea if they're going to be any good, but that's what this video is all about. Also grabbed some white spirit as a thinner, just the basic stuff, just to make sure that we can use it properly. And to start with, we just want to have a bit of a trial to see how the paint lays down. Mostly interested in its transparency and also its staining properties, which apparently appears to be important. And so all I did was get a sheet of plastic and spray paint that up with Stynylrez grey undercoat so that we had a base on which to apply the paints. Laying out all 20 of the paints, we can see the range of colours that are there. There's 3 iridescents on the left, and then you have a progressive range of colours. And all I did was mix a little bit of thinner with the paint to make it into something akin to a sort of a stain slash wash, just to apply it to the plastic to get an idea of its coloration to start with. And I must admit I monkeyed around with it a little bit, not really knowing exactly how to go about this. I was trying putting some thinners down on the white tile and then trying to mix the paint in it. That wasn't working particularly well, so I then tried bringing the paint down and adding some of the thinner, which seemed to work, but I was using too much, and I found that it was just dabbing the brush in very slightly into the thinner gave the best proportion of thinner to paint to get a reasonable sort of mix. Now you can see the first 4 that we put down there are very translucent. They don't seem to have an awful lot of coverage, so they're quite thin. That's the 3 iridescents and Payne's grey. The titanium white, on the other hand, is actually quite opaque, probably given the type of pigmentation that's in there. The bright yellow and the cadmium yellow appear to be a little bit more see-through, and while the colour is quite intense on the deep yellow cadmium, it too doesn't appear to have the same sort of coverage. Now moving on, the red actually looks very intense, and when it actually applies, it seems to be about a 50-50 sort of translucency. It does have a good bit of coverage, and surprisicus, I totally overlooked magenta and went straight to vivid pink, and that is, as the name implies, quite pink, but also somewhat see-through. Now we're down onto the blues, and ultramarine blue does actually look like an ultramarine, and it certainly has a good coloration, whereas primary phthalo blue is a bit darker and is a sort of more of a French blue, a richer blue. The turquoise, really it looks like there's a lot of white in there, again very opaque, so it'll be interesting to see how that performs. The sap green, another nice dark color. Didn't put enough thinner in that, so you could really feel it being sticky when trying to apply it onto the sheet, so I went back and just added a bit of thinner to that, just to dilute that a little bit so everything was somewhat consistent in terms of the amount of paint and thinner. Ivory, I'm expecting that to be somewhat like the white, given it's a somewhat light color and probably has again a fair bit of white in it, and you can see it's a very solid looking finish. Yellow ochre, kind of hoping that might actually have some good staining ability, being such a rich color, but we'll just have to wait and see. It's not as opaque, but it certainly is a nice rich color that should be pretty good. On to the one and only brown that you get in the set, which is burnt umber, which is generally a sort of a go-to sort of color for most people. Add a bit of thinner to it and apply that, and we can sort of, upon counting, going something's missing. It's sort of more of a chocolate brown. I thought it might have been a bit darker. The neutral grey looks almost like white when you actually apply it over a grey. There's not a substantial amount of difference actually between it and the white. Really, at times you can see it's just slightly lighter, and you could probably mix that by just putting a little bit of the ivory black straight into the white rather than actually having it on hand. But the black itself, it's actually supposed to be somewhat see-through, and it appears to be when you add the thinner to it that it's not completely solid. And lucky last, I forgot about it, magenta, and we'll just apply that on and see how that looks. It's a nice rich looking color. Certainly adding the thinner to it, and we apply it, and it seems somewhat solid despite it's supposed to be somewhat clear according to the information. So having a close look, we can see roughly what we've got and what we're left with there on the tile. And the idea now is to give it some time to sort of dry up so that we can rub it off and see what the staining properties physically are. So we've put up a little chart that comes on the back of the box, and you can see that the iridescence is sort of 50-50 opaque and see-through, whereas Payne's grey is somewhat translucent the whole way. The white, the bright yellow are supposed to be quite solid, and they certainly leave a bit of stain. The two yellows have left a little bit of coloration there, and the reds likewise. The blues, certainly the phthalo blue seems to have stained better, as has the sap green. The ivory and the ochre are supposed to be somewhat solid, and they certainly look it. And the burnt umber similarly is supposed to be somewhat opaque. The grey, like I said, it almost looks like white here. The black, despite being somewhat semi-translucent, and the magenta being totally translucent, actually leave a fair bit of colour behind. So they've got some reasonable staining properties, which is great. And just having a close-up, we can clearly see the residue there, which gives us an indication of what sort of colour we can expect when we start to wipe it off. And this will form the base coat upon which we will then place other colours, and it will therefore be influencing the top coats that go over there. And the more intense the colour is, the more of an impact it will have, and obviously it'll mix in because the oil is still wet. So that's the plan. Looking forward to actually putting it on a model. Stay tuned, we are getting there slowly but surely. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.